Chapter 17 of Wilson Rawls' book, Summer of the Monkeys. Just as Rowdy and I started for Grandpa's store, Daisy was yelling, "Jay Berry, if you're going to be running, you'd better be careful. You might lose your money." This scared me. Daisy was right. I ran my hand down in my pocket and took a firm grip on that money before I started running. I learned on that trip that it's not easy to run for 3 miles with one hand in your pocket, but I did it. Grandpa must have been looking for me because he was standing at the doorway of the shop when I came puffing up. "When I saw you coming, I thought you'd lost an arm," he said. "I couldn't see but one. I was afraid I might lose my money, Grandpa," I said. Grinning, he says, "So I held it all the way." "Oh, I see," Grandpa said. As we walked into the store, I said, "Did you get those ponies, Grandpa?" "They're out in the barn lot," Grandpa said. 2 of them, a roan gelding and a paint mare. "They've been broken, and they're gentle." As I stood there looking at my old grandpa, I had a feeling something was bothering him. He wasn't acting natural. He was too serious. He didn't seem to be the least bit excited about my ponies. Thinking maybe I was just imagining things, I asked, "Grandpa, how much is a pony going to cost me?" "He wants $100 for the roan," Grandpa said, "and $75 for the paint. That's what the Indian wanted when I got there, and that's what he wanted when I left. I've sworn 100 times I wouldn't deal with that Cherokee anymore, and I mean it this time." I couldn't help but grinning, for I knew that Grandpa didn't mean a word of what he was saying. The truth was, he and Indian Tom were good friends, unless they were making a deal on horses. "Grandpa," I asked, "will you help me pick out my pony?" Grandpa frowned and he said, I've been thinking about that. The way I look at it, it's your first pony, and I think you don't need any help from anybody else. This will be something you remember always, your first pony. I don't think you should share this with anyone." "All right, Grandpa," I said. "I hope I don't pick the scrubbiest one." "Oh, you won't have to worry about that," Grandpa said. "They're both good ponies." I thanked Grandpa, and with Rowdy bouncing along at my side, I walked to the barn lot. Before I opened the gate, I peeked through the crack and saw 2 of the most beautiful ponies I had ever seen. The ponies had heard us. They were standing with their heads raised and their ears pricked, looking at the gate. Horseflies were bothering them. They were stomping their feet and swishing their tails. Right off, I saw that the roan didn't stand as high as the paint. He was chunky and solid. His coat was so glossy it glistened in the sun. "Rowdy," I said in a low voice, "that roan is built for power. He could go all day and night and never get tired." "That paint is built for speed." The dark black patterns on her looked like they'd been painted on. Her legs were long and slim, and she had a perfect head, small and dainty. "I bet she can run like the wind." I opened the gate and walked close to the ponies and stopped. What I knew about judging horses you could have put in a snuff can. All I had to go on was what I liked. As far back as I could remember, in every dream I had had of owning my own pony, it had always been a beautiful paint. Not taking my eyes off of her, I said, "Rowdy, I don't want to even look at that roan. I've made up my mind. I want that paint pony. She's the one for me." Rowdy seemed to realize that this was one of the biggest days of my life, and he was so happy, just wiggling all over. To make the ponies move so I could see how they walked, I stomped my foot and clapped my hands and yelled, "Hey!" in a loud voice. The roan snorted and bolted to the other side of the barn lot. The muscles in his legs and shoulders nodded and quivered as he ran. He was a beauty. The paint didn't move. She stood in her tracks. She just stood there with her head up, looking straight at me. I liked that. I didn't want my pony to be nervous and jumpy. I walked over to her and held out my hand. She wasn't the least bit nervous or scared. With her small ears pointed at me, she lowered her head. I felt her hot breath on my fingers as she nuzzled my hand. Then she raised her head and nibbled the brim of my old straw hat. I noticed that her eyes were light brown, warm and soft. I almost cried as I laid my face against her head. I've waited a long, long time for you, little girl, I said. Now you're mine, and I will always be good to you. I backed about 10 feet away from the paint and snapped my fingers. Come on, little girl, I said. I want to see you walk. She came to me willingly, but what I saw hurt me all over. She was limping on her right hind leg. What's the matter, little girl? I asked as I walked around to look at her hoof. Do you have something in your hoof? When I knelt down, I saw why she was limping. My old heart dropped clear down to the bottom of my stomach, and I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. In the fetlock just above the hoof, my beautiful pony had a deep, raw, red wound. Flies and gnats were swarming around it. I jumped back and said, "No! Oh, no!" Not taking the time to open the gate, I flew over the rail fence and ran to the store. "Grandpa," I shouted as I darted through the door, "that paint pony has a bad cut on her leg." Grandpa looked over his glasses at me. "I know that pony has a cut on its leg," he said. "She got caught in a barbed wire fence, but it's not as bad as you think. The tendon hasn't been hurt at all. With the right kind of doctoring, that pony will be as good as new in 4 or 5 weeks. 4 or 5 weeks, I exclaimed. "Grandpa, I don't want to wait for that pony to ride 4 or 5 weeks. I want a pony I can ride right now. I'd like to ride her home." "Well, what about the roan?" Grandpa said. "He's a good pony. He's just as good as the paint, maybe even better." "He sure is a beauty," I said, "but I've wanted the paint. I've always wanted a paint pony, but I don't want one that's crippled." "Why don't you have another look at the roan?" Grandpa said. "You might change your mind." "All right," I said, but I sure wanted that paint pony. With a heavy heart, I went back to the barn lot to look at the roan gelding. I must have walked around him 50 times. I liked everything I saw. I just couldn't make up my mind. Something seemed to have gone out of my pony wanting at that moment. Every step I took, the paint followed, limping along as best she could beside me. Time after time, she would push me with her head, nibble at my clothes. Once she even nickered. She seemed to be begging me to take her. More disturbed than I have ever been, I went back to the store to have another talk with Grandpa. "Grandpa," I said, "I like that roan. I like him a lot. But I just can't make up my mind. I wish that paint pony wasn't crippled." "I'd like to help you," Grandpa said, "but I'm afraid I can't. You'll have to make up your own mind." "Grandpa," I said, "are those the only ponies that Indian Tom had?" "No," Grandpa said. "Indian Tom had about 60 head he wanted to sell, all kinds. Horses, mules, ponies, and even a few donkeys." "He did?" I exclaimed. "Then how come you brought one that was crippled home? Why didn't you bring one that was okay and fine?" "Oh, I don't know," Grandpa said very seriously. "You know, there's always a reason behind everything. Maybe I felt sorry for that little mare. I feel sorry for anything that's crippled, don't you?" "Oh, sure I do, Grandpa," I said. "I always feel sorry for crippled little things. I really feel sorry for that mare. She's so pretty. I'd take her in a minute, but I just don't want to wait 5 weeks to ride her." "It's tough for anything being crippled, don't you think? Animals, humans, even little birds," Grandpa said. "You know, a lot of cripples could be helped if someone would just take the time to help them." The way Grandpa kept talking about cripple things started me thinking that he wanted me to take the paint pony. Because I'd done anything to help my grandpa, even if it hurt me, I said, "Grandpa, do you want me to take the paint? If you do, I'll take her, even if she's a cripple." "Nope, nope," Grandpa said, shaking his head. "I'm not trying to make up your mind for you. I want you to do that. You pick the pony that you want." "I think I'll have another look at them," I said. "I just wish that she wasn't a cripple. I'd be riding her right now." "If you do make up your mind," Grandpa said, "there's a halter hanging on the gate post." I thanked Grandpa and walked back to the barn lot with Rowdy. I took the halter from the gate post and opened the gate and stepped inside. The ponies were standing on the far side of the lot about 10 feet apart. and they were watching us. As I stood there with a halter in my hand, I looked from the roan to the paint, from the paint to the roan. I said, "Doggone it, Rowdy, I just don't know which pony I want. If I take the roan, I know that I'll never forget that little mare. And if I take her, I'll have to wait before I can ride her. If I had the money, I'd just buy them both." I had about decided to have another talk with Grandpa when suddenly Rowdy trotted across the barn lot and sat down in front of the little mare. With his old tail stirring up the dust, he looked at her. The little mare wasn't the least bit scared of Rowdy. She just stood there looking down at him with her small pointy ears pointed forward. Then very slowly she lowered her head down and sniffed him. I saw Rowdy's long tongue reach out and lap her nose. She threw back her head and snorted, but didn't move in her tracks. Rowdy's old tail went crazy. I couldn't hear him, but I knew he was whimpering happily. I could tell by the surprised look on that little mare's face that this was probably the first time she'd been kissed on the nose by an old hound dog. She must have liked it because she lowered her head and had another sniff. Rowdy went absolutely crazy. He wiggled and twisted all the way around that little mare. Once he even pranced under her. The little mare never moved. She just stood there, favoring her crippled leg, swishing her tail, and watching Rowdy's happy face. All at once, Rowdy left the little mare and came bounding back to me. He almost knocked the breath out of me by rearing up and hitting me in the chest with his front paws. I put my arms around my old hound dog. "Oh, Rowdy," I said, "why'd you go and do a thing like that for? Are you trying to tell me to take that little mare? But she's crippled up. Can't you see that? I don't want a crippled pony." I still had my arms around Rowdy and was trying to dodge his lapping tongue when I saw movement from the corner of my eye. I looked up and saw the little mare come limping across the barn lot. She came right up to me and gave me a push with her head. Up until then, everything that had happened had made my old heart as heavy as lead. But that little mare, when she gave me a push, it just hauled off and melted me all to pieces. With one arm around my old hound dog and the other arm around the neck of the little mare, I said in a choked voice, "All right, little girl, you win. You've got yourself a home, and I've got myself a pony. I think I would have picked you anyway." I could have sworn that she lowered her head to make it easy for put the halter on. I led her out of the barn lot as I was tying her to the hitch rail when Grandpa came out of the store. His hands were shoved down in his pockets and he had a serious look on his face. "Is that the pony you want?" he asked. "It sure is, Grandpa," I said. "I've waited a long time for a pony to ride. I guess I can wait 4 or 5 more weeks." Grandpa frowned and started digging at his wiry whiskers with his fingers. "I hope you haven't made a mistake," he said. "Sometimes a fella can do things in too much of a hurry, and later on he may regret what he's done." "I won't ever regret buying this little mare, Grandpa," I said. "I won't ever regret that." "I hope not," Grandpa said. "Do you think I should have taken the roan?" I asked. "No," Grandpa said. "I didn't mean that at all. I just want you to be sure of what you're doing. I wouldn't want you to be hurt later on." Just then, Grandma came out of the porch onto the porch of the house. "Jayberry," she hollered, "is that the pony you're going to buy?" "It sure is, Grandma," I hollered back. "What do you think of her?" "She's a beauty," Grandma said, "but I thought I saw her limping." "She has a cut on her leg," I said. "Grandpa says it'll be all right in a few weeks." "You let your little sister doctor that crippled leg," Grandma said. "She'll have her well in no time." Before I could say anything, Grandpa said, "By golly, your grandma's right. Daisy probably knows more about crippled legs than anyone else in these hills. She's been walking on one all of her life." "If I know Daisy," I said, "I won't have to ask her to doctor my pony's leg. She'll put on that Red Cross nurse's uniform and take over. She always does." "Maybe I should have another look at that leg," Grandpa said. He came over, knelt down, fingered the cut with his gentle old hands. Clicking his tongue and shaking his head, he said, "That's a nasty cut, but the tendon hasn't been hurt at all. I hate to see anything crippled like that. It's pitiful." On hearing a rumbling noise, I looked down the road and saw a wagon coming. There were 5 Cherokee Indians in it. "Grandpa," I said, "it looks like you have some people coming to the store." Grandpa stood up and looked down the road, and he said, "Oh, that's John Cumdinger and his family." Then Grandpa turned around and he said, "Maybe you should go home and think more about buying this pony. Talk it over with your mother and father and your sister. You might change your mind." I could hardly believe what Grandpa was saying. Change my mind? "Oh no, Grandpa, I would never do that. I want this little mare more than anything. I won't ever change my mind about that." "I know how much you want a pony," he said. "I went through the same thing when I was a boy. But sometimes a fella can want something so bad, he'll overlook things that are more important. When that happens, it can really hurt a fella, you know. I've had it happen to me." Knowing my old grandpa as I did, I had a feeling he was trying to tell me something, but I just couldn't figure out what it was. He knew how much I wanted a pony in 22 and had worked to get 'em. "Grandpa," I said, "I couldn't be overlooking anything. Owning my own pony and 22 are the most important things in my life. That's all I've ever wanted. I don't want anything else." "All right," Grandpa said, "I guess your mind is made up. If a pony is what you want, a pony is what you'll have. You've earned that right, and I'll say no more." Just then the wagon pulled up in front of the store and the Indians started getting out of it. "Oh yeah," Grandpa said, "almost forgot. You'll need a saddle. I know a fellow down on the river who has a good used one he wants to sell. I think I can make a pretty good deal on buying it." "I'll take it," I said. Before I thought, well, that's if I have enough money. If I do, I can do without that 22 for a while. "You won't have to do without anything," Grandpa said. "You have $156, don't you? That's more than enough to buy a pony, a saddle, and a gun." "Well, Grandpa, I gave Daisy $6, I said. "I just had to. She'd been doing things for me and even fed the monkeys for me." "That's all right," Grandpa said. "You still have plenty, and you still should have some left over." I ran my hand down in my pocket and pulled out my money and handed it all to my grandpa. "Grandpa," I said, "will you take care of my money and pay Indian Tom for my pony? If I have any left after I buy a saddle and a gun, I'll give it to Mama." "I'll take care of it," he said. "Don't you worry about a thing." I was untying the halter rope from the hitching rail when Grandpa said, "On your way home, take it easy with that mare. Don't walk her too fast. In a few weeks, you'll have one of the finest little ponies in these hills." "Grandpa," I said, "without you, I don't know what I'd do. I really don't. You're always helping me." Grandpa grinned. "That's what grandpas are for, isn't it?" he said. I thanked Grandpa. With my heart singing, I started for home. As I walked along the country road, leading my pony, no boy on earth could have been happier. All of my dreams had finally come true. I had my own pony. I couldn't remember a day when the sky looked so clear or so blue and the sunshine was so bright. Every bush seemed to have a bird singing in it. From down in the bottoms, I heard the shrill call of a bob white and the clamoring cry of a kingfisher in flight. At the top of an old dead tree close to the road, a mockingbird was singing. I stopped to listen. He mocked every bird in the Ozark Hills, from a red-headed woodpecker to a screaming blue jay. On that walk, my old hound wouldn't get more than a foot from my side. He had never done that before. About every 10 feet, I would feel his warm tongue lick my hand. He acted like he was jealous of the little mare. I stopped, knelt down, put my arms around him, and said, "Oh, Rowdy, you don't have to be jealous of my pony. I'll always love you. You know that. Why, I couldn't live without you, my boy." Rowdy was so pleased he went all to pieces. He started running circles around us. He found an old corn cob laying by the side of the road and started playing with it. Holding it in his mouth and slinging his head up and bounding from the side of the road, he dropped the corn cob in the middle of the road and then started growling at it and digging at it. I laughed at his playful actions. As I walked along, I decided I'd try something. I threw the halter rope over my pony's neck and kept walking without looking back. I hadn't gone 20 feet when I heard the clopping of her hooves. She was following me. I was so proud of her, my old heart came close to jumping right through the bib of my overalls. As I neared the farm, I saw Papa plowing way down in one of the fields. He stopped his team and jerked the battered old hat from his head and waved at me. I waved back, feeling as proud as I ever had a day in my life. About 50 yards from our house, I stopped. With my fingers, I combed my pony's mane and straightened out her long hair and the beautiful tail. I rubbed the dust from her coat with my handkerchief. I wanted her to look pretty before Mama and Daisy saw her. Just as I took a hold of the halter rope to be on my way again, I heard Daisy humming. She was up in her playhouse on the hillside. I wasn't too surprised when she started singing. I stopped to listen. She was singing my favorite song, a song I'd heard my mother sing many times, the old master painter from the faraway hills. As I stood there listening to her clear voice ring out over the valley, I happened to glance down at the raw red wound on my pony's leg. Like a lightning bolt, it hit me. I knew then what my old grandpa had been trying to tell me. I was so shook up I dropped the halter rope. Closing my eyes and shaking my head, I said, "Oh, Grandpa, how could I have been so dumb? Dear God, how could I have been so stupid?" In a daze, I stumbled to the side of the road and sat down on a rock and buried my face in my arms. I remembered everything my old grandpa had said. From the time I got to the store until I left, it ran through my mind. Don't be in too big of a hurry about buying a pony. Talk it over with your mother and father. Be sure of what you're doing. I don't want you to do something you'll be sorry for later. Rowdy must have sensed something was wrong. He came to me. He tried to push his head up under my arm so he could lick the salty tears off my face. I put my arms around him. In a voice choked with emotion, I said, "Rowdy, I can't buy this pony. I just can't. If I buy her, I could never ride her. Every time I got on her back, I'd think about my little sister and that old crippled leg of hers." That's what Grandpa was trying to tell me. He wanted me to give the money to her so she could go to the hospital and get it straightened out. How could I have been so dumb? I guess I just couldn't think of anything else but myself and the pony. I got up, took the halter rope in my hands, and started back toward the store. I saw Papa stop his plowing. He didn't wave his hat at me this time. He just stood there with his hands on the plow handles, watching me as I walked back up the road. That was the longest walk of my life, the longest walk I had ever taken. I didn't see any blue sky or hear any birds singing. My mind was numb. I couldn't think. I felt like I was lost in a deep, dark timber that I didn't know which way to go or what to do. As I came inside of the store, I saw my old grandpa sitting in the rocker on the porch. As usual, he was sitting there looking across the country with a fly swatter in his hand and rocking away. With my head bowed low, I didn't even look at him. I walked by within 10 feet of him. He never said a word, and I didn't either. When I heard the squeaking of his old rocker stop, I knew he was watching me. I opened the gate, led my little mare into the barn lot, and then took the halter from her head. With tears in my eyes, I patted her on the neck and said, "Goodbye, old girl. I guess we can't have everything we'd like to have. We have to give up a few things every now and then. I'll never forget you, and I'll always love you." I was hanging the halter on the gate post when something way down deep inside busted wide open. I placed my hands on the post, and I buried my face and arms and cried. If teardrops could have made that fence post sprout roots and grow, that post would have been 20 feet tall. After I had a good cry, I felt a little better, but not very much better. With my handkerchief, I dried my face, and as best I could, I walked over and sat down on the porch by my grandpa. He was just sitting there, with a pleased look on his friendly old face, rocking away. Neither of us said a word. I thought that the slow squeaking of Grandpa's rocker was going to make me bawl again, and it would have, too, if Grandpa hadn't started talking. He coughed and squirmed around in the chair, and in a low, soft voice, he said, "Well, what's the matter? You changed your mind? You going to take the roan?" "I'm not going to take either of the ponies, Grandpa," I said. "I just can't." "Neither of them?" Grandpa said. "Well, I don't understand. What happened?" "I can't buy a pony, Grandpa. If I do, I'll always feel guilty. Every time I climbed on her back and go riding, I think of my little sister and that crippled old leg of hers. I'm going to give the money to her so she can go to the hospital and get it fixed." "I think you were trying to tell me that the whole time, and that's why you brought the crippled mare home with you, so I could see it, and maybe that would wake me up. But I was so blind I couldn't see anything but what I wanted." Not saying a word, Grandpa ran his hand down into his pocket and pulled out the money I had given him. He handed it back to me. In a voice that quivered with emotion, he said, "Son, I've always been proud of you, but right now, no grandpa on this earth could be as proud as I am, though I'm not very proud of myself." "Why, Grandpa? You didn't do anything." "Oh, I don't know," he said. "I think there's a passage in the Bible that could explain it better than I could, where it says, 'O ye of little faith.'" On hearing the door slam, I turned and saw Grandma coming over from the house. She was carrying a small cloth sack in her hand. She walked up to us. Holding the sack out to me, she said, "Here, J. Berry, take this to your mother." "What is it, Grandma?" I asked as I took the sack. "It's the money your grandpa and I have been saving for Daisy's doctor bill," she said. "That's what you're going to do with your money, isn't it?" "Sure, Grandma," I said, very surprised, "but how did you know?" Grandma smiled and said, "Oh, I knew. Us old grandmas know a little bit more than you boys give us credit for." "Oh, Grandma," I said, "I should have known. You can always read my mind." "Say," Grandpa said, all excited, "I just thought of something. Your grandma's been wanting to go to town. Tomorrow's a good day for it. Now, if you and your father can come up and take care of the store for mother, and Daisy could ride in with us. The train runs from Tahlequah to Oklahoma City, doesn't leave there until middle of the afternoon. We'd get them there in plenty of time to catch it." "I'll tell Mama as quick as I get home," I said. "It's getting late," Grandma said. "You better be on your way. Tell your mother if she wants to ride in with us to be ready at first thing in the morning." I thanked Grandma and Grandpa and lit out for home. Mama, Papa, and Daisy were sitting down to supper when I came flying into the house. I walked up to Mama and handed her the sack of money and said, "Here, Mama, this is for you." "What is it?" Mama asked. "It's the money I got for catching all the monkeys, and all that Grandpa and Grandma have saved. We want you to have it so you can take Daisy to the hospital and fix her crippled leg." I saw Mama's face turn grayish white. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She looked at the sack and then looked across the table at Daisy. She looked again at the sack and then at Papa and then at me. It was so still in our kitchen, you could have heard a dream walk across the floor. The only sound I heard was the slow hissing of the tea kettle on the cook stove. Mama closed her eyes. I saw tears when they squeaked out of her eyeballs and ran down her cheeks. In a low voice, Mama said, "Oh, thank you, dear Lord. Oh, thank you. Oh, thank you. I'll be grateful forever." Daisy went over to Mama and put her arms around her and started crying. Something that felt like a big old wasp nest got wadded up in my throat, and darned if I didn't bawl like a baby too. Papa got up from the table and walked to the front room. When he came back, he had what little money he and Mama had saved. Daisy hurried to her room and got her money, and I've never seen so much money in my whole life. There was money all over the place. "Papa," I said, "Grandpa and Grandma are going into town tomorrow. He said if you and I can take care of the store, Mama and Daisy could ride in with them and catch the train from Tahlequah to Oklahoma City." Papa looked at Mama and said, "As long as we've waited for this day, I can't think of any reason to put it off. What do you think?" "What do I think?" Mama said, so excited. "Why, I'd go this very minute if I could." "Then get started packing," Papa said. "Don't worry about Jayberry and me. We'll be all right." Mama and Daisy were off in the other room packing their clothes when Papa in a low voice said, "Son, I want to say this before, but I didn't want your Mama and Daisy to hear. I didn't want them to know that you had almost gotten home with your pony. You grew 10 feet tall today, and I'm proud of you. I'd like to shake your hand." I shook hands with my Papa for the first time in my life, and I felt like that all of his strength and all of his maturity and all of his wisdom came right through his arm and spread through my body. This has been chapter 17